Have you ever felt like you're constantly waiting for permission to just be? Like there's a heavy, invisible hand on your back, pushing you to perform, to justify your existence, even when you're alone in your own kitchen? This pervasive sense of being offline, of having a disconnect between the person you are inside and the version you present to the world, is often the quiet, heartbreaking inheritance of a childhood steeped in relentless, soul-crushing criticism. It's the feeling that your internal world is unsafe, constantly monitored by the echo of a parent's judgment, a wound that makes true, authentic living feel like a terrifying risk, reflecting the long-held suffering and emotional pain you carry. Today, we are going to dive deep into how that early emotional landscape continues to shape your adult behaviors, and most importantly, how we can begin the sacred work of bringing your whole self back online, presenting a real and accessible solution for this profound challenge. We're talking about the roots of self-doubt that feel genetic, the hypervigilance that exhausts you, and the profound journey of finally claiming your right to simply exist, unedited and unequivocally worthy, using rich detail and relatable storytelling to enhance this necessary identification. The pain often begins in a home that offered conditional love, where emotional instability was the daily weather, and the child's primary task was to regulate the parent's mood, not their own. You learned quickly that your authentic expression, your sadness, your exuberant joy, your normal childish needs, was not just inconvenient, but a catalyst for instability, leading to withdrawal, rage, or a sudden, terrifying absence of emotional connection. This volatility taught your nervous system that visibility was synonymous with danger, installing a deep, pre-verbal fear of showing your true self, because the cost of being seen was always too high. This forced the small child to perform a tragic cognitive split, internalizing the idea that the source of the household's chaos was not the adult, but their own, flawed self, transferring responsibility from the unstable parent onto their small shoulders. Thus began the lifelong pattern of assuming responsibility for an emotional environment they were too young and too powerless to control, becoming, in essence, the family's unsolicited emotional caretaker from a shockingly young age. This foundational error is the source of the adult belief that you must manage the feelings of everyone around you to ensure your own stability. This dynamic meant that your emotional life was not your own. It was constantly used as a resource or a target for the parent's unmet needs, leaving you constantly depleted and emotionally famished. The parent's need to be admired or soothed overshadowed your most basic needs for comfort and security, creating a continuous emotional deficit that feels impossible to fill in adulthood. You learned that expressing a need was the fastest way to invite criticism or neglect, so you sealed those needs away. The chronic, unpredictable, sharp criticisms etched a permanent groove in your young mind, a survival script that dictated you must be perfect, silent, or invisible to be safe, a pattern that still keeps you rigidly bound to perfectionism today. You became the tiny, unsolicited caretaker, reading every shift in the parental gaze, listening for the cadence of their footsteps, constantly scanning the horizon for the next emotional storm that you felt compelled to prevent. This constant state of vigilance is exhausting, fundamentally robbing the child of their natural state of relaxed being and replacing it with a constant draining alertness. This isn't just a memory of a bad day, it's the origin story of your adult anxiety, the deep-seated belief that your mere existence is an imposition that must be earned through flawless, unending effort and self-sacrifice. You carry the internal residue of never feeling safe enough to just drop the performance, constantly anticipating the moment someone will point out your shortcomings and confirm your deepest fears of inadequacy. This means genuine rest feels like an impossible luxury. The underlying wound is the profound loneliness of being completely unseen in your struggle, knowing that the person who was supposed to be your safe harbor was the one causing the storm. This emotional isolation forces the child to become their own fragile container, a tiny person desperately trying to hold the weight of an entire family's dysfunction without any support or validation. The pain is not just what happened, but what didn't happen, the consistent, safe, and nurturing presence that was missing. This internalizing of responsibility creates an internal judge that is infinitely harsher than any external critic, an internal mechanism perpetually punishing you for imagined failures. This inner judge maintains the parental narrative, ensuring you stay small and compliant, believing that any moment of pride or self-acceptance is an act of dangerous hubris that will invite disaster. This is why self-compassion feels so incredibly difficult, because it directly contradicts your original survival programming. The cumulative effect is a profound sense of emotional homelessness, feeling like you don't truly belong anywhere, not even within your own skin, because your inner landscape was colonized by the needs and criticisms of the parent. You learned that your body and your emotions were tools to manage the parent, not sacred spaces to be honored and protected, leading to a profound disconnection from your physical and feeling self. This dynamic quickly led to a profound inversion of roles, a process known as parentification, where the child assumes the responsibilities of the adult, essentially becoming a miniature spouse or therapist to the narcissistic parent. The parent, emotionally immature or focused solely on their own needs, abdicated their role, forcing you to step up to fill the void, often feeling like the only adult in the room. This inversion set a tragic precedent for your adult relationships, training you to seek out partners who also require constant emotional maintenance. You didn't get to have a childhood defined by exploration and play. Your developmental task became managing the parents' brittle ego, soothing their distress, and celebrating their triumphs, while your own small needs were left shivering outside the door. This forced maturity taught you to ignore your own developmental timeline, replacing spontaneous joy with calculated performance designed to stabilize the environment. The deepest cost is the loss of your inherent right to a carefree, protected childhood. This required the child to learn to read the environment with laser-like accuracy, becoming an emotional radar, scanning constantly for shifts in mood, tone, and body language to predict the parent's next move. You learn to anticipate, to mediate, to manage the narrative of the family, always positioning yourself as the stabilizer, the peacekeeper, the high-achieving proxy that could momentarily reflect glory back onto the demanding parent. This ceaseless reading of the room still manifests in adulthood as chronic exhaustion and difficulty focusing on your own internal needs. This acute sensitivity meant you became an expert in everyone else's emotional states, not out of true, relaxed empathy, but as a critical survival skill, because their stability was inextricably linked to your immediate safety. You could recite the parent's emotional rulebook perfectly, understanding precisely what to say, what to wear, and even what grade to bring home to minimize the immediate threat of criticism or withdrawal. The survival of your small self depended on this emotional mastery of the parent. The inversion of roles also meant you were praised and rewarded for your performance and competency, cementing the belief that love is transactional, given only in exchange for your utility and emotional labor. Your value was never inherent. It was always tied to how effectively you served the parent's narrative, leading to the adult feeling that they are constantly on a treadmill of achievement. This is why stopping to breathe feels like a failure. The child's identity became inextricably linked to this stabilizing function, making it terrifying to ever admit weakness, ask for help, or simply fail at something, as it felt like the entire family system would collapse. The world outside the home might have seen a bright, successful, and capable child, but internally, you were carrying the silent, crushing weight of maintaining an impossible facade. This external success masks profound internal fragility. This tragic exchange meant that your own needs, feelings, and identity were completely neglected, viewed only as raw material to be shaped and presented for the parent's approval, rendering your authentic self irrelevant. The adult consequence is a deep-seated confusion about what you actually want, who you actually are, and what feelings are truly yours versus those you absorbed from the environment. You became fluent in a foreign emotional language, but mute in your own. The emotional energy required for this role inversion, the continuous monitoring and managing, was so immense that it left no reserve for normal developmental tasks, particularly the task of forming a secure, separate sense of self. The tragic consequence is that you became an expert in everyone else's internal world, while your own needs and boundaries were completely neglected, resulting in the feeling that your true self is permanently offline. What we are talking about here is not an abstract concept. It is the physical and emotional residue of a profound psychological mechanism, where parentification and hypervigilance become your default operating system. Parentification is the emotional betrayal of having your childhood stolen and replaced with a burden you were never meant to carry, a heavy cloak of responsibility that feels like your birthright. It manifests in adulthood as a chronic inability to simply receive or rest, always needing to be the one giving, doing, and ensuring the comfort of everyone else, the ultimate self-sabotage of joy. Hypervigilance is the heightened, ceaseless scanning of your environment for threat, a state of constant, low-grade alertness that keeps your nervous system permanently on edge, believing the next criticism or catastrophe is always one wrong step away. This means your internal alarm system is perpetually ringing, even in safe environments, manifesting as generalized anxiety, difficulty sleeping, or a startling sensitivity to noise and sudden movements. Your body is still living in the dangerous house of your childhood. This isn't an anxiety disorder per se. It's a perfectly rational survival response to an unpredictable, emotionally dangerous environment, a painful testament to how well you adapted to a truly impossible situation. Your nervous system learned that constant readiness was key to survival, and that lesson is so deeply etched that it overrides any adult logic telling you that you are now safe and the threat is gone. You are unconsciously playing a defensive game. The psychological mechanism at play is the instinctive need for control in a world that felt utterly uncontrollable, leading to overplanning, rigid routines, and a deep discomfort with spontaneity or ambiguity. This need for control is not about micromanaging others. It's about attempting to manage the internal fear that if you loosen your grip, the familiar chaos will rush in to destroy you. You became your own prison warden, enforcing safety through rigidity. In emotional terms, this mechanism is the constant demand of your inner critic, which acts as an internal representative of the narcissistic parent, preventing you from fully relaxing or enjoying success. This critic whispers constant judgment and fear, keeping you focused on potential failure rather than present enjoyment, ensuring you never grow complacent enough to drop your guard. The critic is a misguided attempt at protection. Your internal narrative is dominated by the need to preemptively solve problems, both real and imagined, for others, based on the childhood belief that if you can just be useful enough, you will be spared the parent's wrath. This pattern keeps you focused externally, making it almost impossible to tune into your own somatic and emotional signals, further deepening the sense of being disconnected from yourself. You are living for others, even when you are alone. The underlying emotional truth is that your emotional regulation system was outsourced to your parents' needs, meaning you never developed a healthy, robust capacity for self-soothing or internal validation. When things get difficult in adulthood, your instinct is to freeze, fawn, or flee, the 3 Fs, rather than to calmly process and regulate the emotion internally, because that skill was never modeled or permitted. This is why you seek external validation to calm yourself. This heavy, constant survival mechanism means that any experience of true, unconditional peace feels profoundly unsettling, almost suspicious, because your system equates quiet safety with the calm before a storm. You are unconsciously seeking out chaos or drama, because it is familiar and therefore, in a bizarre way, feels more predictable than the terrifying ambiguity of deep, quiet stability. You have to actively teach your body that peace is safe. To survive in this pressurized environment, you had to learn the art of masking, the deliberate, often unconscious creation of a performer identity designed solely to appease the parent and earn a sliver of safety or approval. This mask becomes the primary way you interact with the world, a well-rehearsed persona that is pleasant, successful, compliant, and critically safe to the people around you, a flawless facade built on suppression. The mask is not a reflection of your personality. It is a meticulously crafted suit of emotional armor. Over time, the true self, the messy, authentic, imperfect self, with genuine needs and desires, recedes further and further into the shadow, leading to a deep, agonizing sense of self-disappearance. You start to believe the mask is you, forgetting the contours of the real face underneath, leading to that quiet but persistent feeling of being an imposter in your own life, always waiting for the moment of unmasking. This disappearance is the theft of your inner world. The performer identity develops out of necessity, driven by the core belief that if the audience, the world, your partner, your boss, sees the true you, they will inevitably be critical, disappointed, and abandon you just as the parent did. This performer runs on the chronic energy of trying to be what you think others want, leaving you feeling profoundly unmoored and asking who you even are when the curtain finally closes and you are left alone. This exhaustion is not physical, it is soul deep. This continuous performance required you to become a master of emotional camouflage, adapting your personality to fit the needs of every room and every person you encounter, a dizzying and confusing dance of self-betrayal. You learn to mirror the traits of others, adopting their opinions and interests to ensure you remain palatable and non-threatening, leading to relationships that are inherently inauthentic and leave you feeling strangely isolated. You are loved for the projection, not the person. The inner life of the performer is one of constant monitoring and editing, a ruthless self-censorship that prevents any vulnerable or critical thought from escaping, reinforcing the idea that your genuine thoughts are dangerous. This self-censorship becomes so automatic that you may not even realize you are doing it, only noticing the resulting emotional numbness and the profound inability to feel truly connected to others, because connection requires authenticity. The identity you formed is a functional identity, the person who can get things done, the responsible one, the achiever. But it lacks the vital component of human identity, the space for vulnerability, mistake-making, and simply resting. This functional identity is rewarded in the external world, making it incredibly difficult to let go of, even when it is clearly causing immense internal suffering and burnout. Your entire sense of self-worth is tied to its maintenance. The sad irony is that while you are technically present in the world, your authentic self is completely offline, unable to connect or be nourished because it is hidden away for fear of eternal judgment and the catastrophic emotional consequence of being truly seen. This profound internal separation is the source of the deep, pervasive loneliness that can haunt even the most outwardly successful person who grew up in this environment. You feel like a ghost in your own existence. The core identity wound is the belief that your inherent self is the problem, that there is something fundamentally wrong with you that needs to be permanently masked, fixed, or hidden from the light of day. This belief prevents you from seeking the very love and validation you crave, because you are convinced that if you ever receive it, it must be based on a lie, the lie of the performer, and is therefore meaningless and destined to be revoked. You are constantly anticipating the devastating revelation of your true inadequacy. Beneath the surface of this high-functioning adult, the inner child remains, silently wounded, carrying a backlog of unmet needs that stretch back decades, needs for unconditional love, simple validation, and the freedom to make mistakes without consequence. This inner child is not a metaphor. It is the part of your psyche that holds the emotional memory of all that was lost and all that was denied. The vulnerable heart that never received the safety it deserved. They are perpetually waiting for the care that never arrived. This inner child doesn't care about your adult achievements or your perfectly curated life. They just want to be seen, comforted, and told that they were, and still are, enough, exactly as they are, independent of any performance. Their emotional clock is still stuck in the moment of trauma, desperately seeking to resolve the pain of that initial abandonment and emotional hunger, which is why adult conflicts can feel so disproportionately threatening. They need a loving adult to step in. The deepest wound here is the absence of witnessing. The feeling that no one truly saw or validated the emotional reality of your childhood, that your suffering was invisible, denied, or minimized by the very people who caused it. This lack of witnessing leads to the adult feeling that you are constantly fighting to prove your reality, struggling to trust your own memory or perception, because they were so often invalidated in the past. You fight an internal battle against gaslighting. This quiet, persistent presence of the inner child's pain manifests as those sudden, disproportionate emotional reactions in adulthood. Those moments where a small slight or a minor rejection triggers a monumental wave of shame or despair. It is a sign that the original injury has been activated, and the abandoned child is crying out for the attention and care they never received, using adult situations to try and finally resolve the ancient trauma. Your adult composure shatters under the weight of the child's past pain. The inner child carries the full weight of the unprocessed grief, the grief for the lost childhood, the grief for the lack of emotional intimacy, and the grief for the necessary self-betrayal required to survive in that family system. This grief is often masked by busyness, anger, or chronic numbness, but it is always there, waiting for a moment of quiet and safety to finally be acknowledged and felt completely. This is the heavy, silent burden you carry every day. The unmet needs of the inner child become the driving force behind many adult relational dynamics, compelling you to constantly seek external sources to provide the validation and nurturing that your parent withheld. This leads to the cycle of codependency, where you overgive to others, subconsciously hoping that by making them feel safe and loved, they will finally turn around and give that missing care back to you. It is a desperate, yet tragic strategy. The work of healing is not about abandoning this child or locking them away. It is about finally turning toward them, acknowledging their suffering, and becoming the loving, stable, and protective adult they desperately needed all along. This means giving yourself permission to feel the vulnerability and the sadness that you were forbidden to express as a child, offering yourself the kind words your parent could never utter. You become the ultimate safe harbor. Until this inner child is fully seen and validated by the adult self, they will continue to pilot your adult life, reacting from a place of fear and scarcity, sabotaging the very intimacy and safety you are consciously trying to build. The adult must take over the steering wheel, but only after gently comforting and reassuring the frightened child who has been navigating life's storms completely alone for far too long. This is the essence of true integration. These deeply ingrained patterns, born from the constant threat of childhood criticism, do not magically disappear when you turn 18. They simply morph into adult manifestations that poison your well-being across every domain of your life. Relationships become minefields, characterized by people-pleasing, fear of confrontation, and the chronic attraction to emotionally unavailable partners who feel strangely familiar to the parent's distant nature. You are unconsciously seeking to redo the trauma, hoping for a different, healing outcome. Your sense of trust is severely compromised, not just of others, but critically, of your own judgment, because you were taught that your perceptions were inherently flawed and wrong, and your instincts unreliable. This self-doubt prevents you from making confident decisions, leaving you perpetually seeking external approval and guidance, further reinforcing the childhood lesson that others know better than you. You cannot rely on your own internal compass. Your self-worth is often tragically tied to your productivity and output, leading to chronic overworking, burnout, and a deep-seated inability to accept genuine compliments or achievements as truly belonging to you. This is the perpetual treadmill of the performer identity, constantly running faster to try and earn the basic worth that was never freely given, convinced that if you stop, your value will immediately drop to zero. The ability to find true rest is compromised, because any moment of stillness or leisure is accompanied by guilt, or the intrusive feeling that you should be doing something more valuable. A persistent, gnawing sense of obligation. This is the hypervigilance manifesting as a rejection of peace, keeping you active and distracted so you don't have to confront the terrifying emptiness and needs of the inner child. You are addicted to the energy of doing. Most agonizingly, emotional regulation is difficult because you were never taught how to feel, process, or express your emotions safely. You were taught to suppress them for the comfort of others, resulting in a backlog of unexpressed feelings. This leads to emotional swings, from numbness to explosive reaction, because the contained emotions eventually breach the wall of suppression, leaving you feeling profoundly out of control and often ashamed. The pattern of chronic responsibility makes you the default problem solver for every group, whether at work, with friends, or within your chosen partnerships, exhausting your resources and preventing others from stepping up and taking accountability. This burden feels necessary, however, because you equate being needed with being valued and loved, reinforcing the codependent belief that your worth is external and dependent on your utility. You move through the world with a feeling of being fundamentally defective, always feeling like an imposter who is one moment away from being exposed as the failure your parent always subtly implied you were. This internal narrative is the engine of your adult self-sabotage, pushing away opportunities or relationships that might truly challenge the deeply held belief that you are unworthy of unconditional happiness. You create distance to manage the inevitable anticipated rejection. Finally, your boundaries are often porous or non-existent, leaving you vulnerable to exploitation and further emotional depletion because you were never taught that your personal space and needs were sacred and worthy of defense. The childhood lesson was that boundaries provoked parental rage or withdrawal, so you learned to dismantle them entirely, a pattern that leaves you perpetually depleted and resentful in adult life. You have to learn how to say no as an act of self-love. At the core of these adult struggles lies a profound biological and emotional reasoning. The instinctual, hardwired need for attachment overrides the need for authenticity. To a child, attachment to the primary caregiver, even a deeply flawed or narcissistic one, is a matter of literal survival, a biological imperative that cannot be ignored or negotiated. The small self inherently understands that losing the caregiver means danger, both emotional and physical. The small self, therefore, makes a tragic but logical survival pact. They give up their authentic self, their unique needs, and their truth in exchange for a semblance of connection and safety, sacrificing their core identity for relational proximity. This choice is rooted in the primitive brainstem, which prioritizes connection over individuality, because separation literally felt life-threatening in the absence of a truly safe alternative. You became a functional, rather than authentic, human being. This is not a character flaw. It is a primal survival pact that your younger self made to stay alive and connected, a deep and enduring lesson that says, to be me is to be rejected, so I must become what they need. Even in adulthood, this ancient wiring persists, creating the immense internal pressure to prioritize the needs and feelings of others over your own, sacrificing your boundaries and your well-being without conscious thought. Your nervous system still believes this pact is active. The fear of abandonment, stemming from this primal need for attachment, becomes the driving emotional force behind your people-pleasing and your difficulty setting boundaries, always preemptively seeking to soothe or appease perceived threats. This fear keeps you tethered to the parental narrative, even long after you have physically left the home, making it excruciatingly difficult to tolerate any moment of relational tension or disagreement. You equate conflict with annihilation. The root of all this pain is that your attachment system was trained to recognize abuse and conditional love as the only accessible form of safety and connection, making healthy, secure relationships feel alien, boring, or even suspiciously dangerous. You are constantly attracted to the familiar chaos because your system recognizes it as the pattern that historically guaranteed a form of attachment, however painful or damaging it was. You are confusing familiarity with safety. This biological imperative explains why knowing intellectually that you are worthy is not enough. The healing has to happen at the level of the body and the nervous system, rewriting the primal lesson that authenticity leads to death. You have to introduce moments of radical safety and connection without performance, teaching your emotional brain that being truly yourself does not immediately activate the survival threat. The logic of the heart must change. The profound violation here is that the child's most fundamental, biological need for a secure base was weaponized against their sense of self, forcing the child to choose between their soul and their survival. This choice leaves a permanent scar of self-betrayal, the deep shame of having had to give up your truth to live. A shame that requires immense self-compassion to finally metabolize and release in adulthood. You must forgive yourself for your survival. Healing involves consciously decoupling attachment from performance, allowing yourself to slowly experience the terrifying vulnerability of being rejected for who you actually are, and surviving that rejection, proving to the inner child that the threat is no longer life-ending. This brave act of self-exposure finally allows the survival wiring to relax, knowing that you are the adult who will protect your own essential well-being, regardless of external validation. The long-term emotional and relational consequences of this conditioning are vast, often manifesting as a complex internal narrative of shame and inadequacy that dictates your every interaction. You carry the emotional legacy of your parents' projections, an internal voice that sounds exactly like their criticism, constantly undermining your accomplishments and whispering that you are fundamentally defective and undeserving of true happiness. This chronic internal shaming prevents you from resting or celebrating your life, This self-inflicted judgment often leads to maladaptive coping styles such as perfectionism, emotional eating, overachievement, substance use, or self-sabotage, all desperate and ineffective attempts to manage the unbearable internal pressure and the constant feeling of worthlessness. These coping styles are not failures. They are the ingenious, albeit destructive ways your system tried to manage an impossible load of unexpressed emotional pain. They served a purpose, but they no longer serve you. Relationally, you might find yourself stuck in a cycle of either codependency, constantly seeking external validation and sacrificing yourself for the needs of others, or complete isolation, preemptively withdrawing to avoid the inevitable pain of being wounded or exposed. Both extremes are ways of managing the fear of intimacy, which was taught to you as a high-risk, high-pain endeavor that inevitably ends in disappointment or abandonment. You can't let anyone too close or too far. This deep-seated fear means that true intimacy, which requires vulnerability and authenticity, feels terrifyingly risky, leading to relationships that lack depth and perpetuate the original feeling of aloneness, even when you are surrounded by people. You may confuse intensity or drama with genuine connection, because that high-wire feeling of emotional risk is what your nervous system was trained to recognize as love. You mistake chaos for passion. The consequence is a life lived in a defensive crouch, always guarding a secret shame you feel you can never let anyone truly see, preventing you from fully showing up in your own life and claiming your own power. This constant defensive posture consumes tremendous emotional and physical energy, leaving you depleted and perpetually feeling like you are operating at a fractional capacity, because so much of your internal bandwidth is dedicated to keeping the walls up. Another deep consequence is the chronic inability to trust your own instincts or feelings, a phenomenon known as epistemic distrust, which is the fear of knowing your own truth because your reality was so often distorted or denied. This makes decision-making agonizing and leads to a paralyzing anxiety about commitment, always second-guessing your choices and feeling that the right answer must lie outside of you. Your core self is permanently disconnected from your cognitive self. The legacy also involves a profound difficulty in receiving positive emotional experiences, such as love, joy, or praise, because your nervous system is suspicious of anything that deviates from the familiar patterns of stress and criticism. You often find a way to undermine the good things in your life by self-sabotaging or creating conflict, because the sustained feeling of peace and happiness feels too foreign and therefore too dangerous to tolerate for long. You unconsciously crave the return to the familiar baseline of suffering. The deep consequence is a sense of feeling like a prisoner of your own past, where the trauma is not just a memory, but an active internal force field dictating your present reality, leading to a life that feels heavy, performative, and profoundly exhausting. The ultimate task of healing is to dismantle this internal force field, brick by emotional brick, and step into the spacious freedom of a life defined by your choices, not your wounds. The first, most vital step toward healing is the profound act of awareness and self-witnessing, the courageous choice to finally turn your gaze inward and acknowledge the pain without minimizing or rationalizing it away. This means moving from the head, the intellectual knowledge of your trauma, to the heart and the body, allowing yourself to feel the reality of what happened without the need to immediately fix or deny it. This simple shift is the beginning of reclaiming your emotional truth. This involves breaking the insidious cycle of self-gaslighting, that internal voice that tells you, "It wasn't that bad," or "You're just too sensitive," which is simply the internalized voice of your parent trying to maintain emotional control over your reality. By naming this internal critic and recognizing its true source, you begin to separate its voice from your own, challenging the inherited narrative that your pain is invalid or fabricated. You are finally giving yourself permission to feel what you feel. Witnessing is the simple, revolutionary act of saying, "Yes, that happened, and it caused me pain, and that pain is valid." Offering yourself the fundamental validation that your parent fundamentally withheld from you. It is the recognition that the way you survived was perfect and necessary, and that the coping mechanisms you developed were brilliant adaptations to an impossible situation, shifting the narrative from shame to self-compassion. This witnessing must be gentle, not judgmental. You are not performing an autopsy on your past, but giving a voice to the experience that was brutally silenced for so long, approaching your wounds with a spirit of loving curiosity. You are learning to hold space for the fragmented, scared parts of yourself, without needing them to change immediately, simply acknowledging their existence as a necessary and profound act of self-reunion. It is the beginning of separating yourself from the survival script, recognizing that the anxious, self-critical voice is not who you are, but the programming that kept you safe and compliant within the dysfunctional family unit. This separation allows you to view your patterns as behaviors you learned, rather than innate flaws you possess, creating the necessary psychological distance to change your response. You are not your wounds, you are the one who survived them. By naming the mechanisms, by seeing the patterns clearly, the parentification, the hypervigilance, you begin to create the necessary distance required to choose a different response, to finally step out of the fog of inherited trauma. This clarity breaks the unconscious grip of the past, allowing you to react to your present environment based on current reality, rather than the emotional echo of your childhood home. Awareness is the first step towards self-sovereignty. The act of witnessing also involves recognizing that the emotional labor you performed as a child, the caretaking, the soothing, the emotional management, was legitimate work that deserves to be acknowledged and grieved as a loss of childhood. You must grant yourself the permission to mourn the childhood you were forced to abandon, finally acknowledging the true cost of your survival and honoring the small child who worked tirelessly for safety. This conscious awareness is the moment you stop defending the legacy and start demanding a new one for yourself, one built on self-trust, self-compassion, and the radical acceptance of your own flawed humanity. You move from being the object of the trauma to the sovereign subject of your own healing journey, choosing to look, to feel, and to name the truth, a profound act of self-reclamation. The high-functioning adult wound is perhaps the most insidious, because the world often rewards the very survival traits that are slowly killing you from the inside, viewing your hyper-responsibility and relentless performance as signs of strength. You are the one who is always fine, the reliable one who never asks for help, the one who meticulously manages every crisis, reinforcing the external facade of invulnerability. This external praise fuels the performer identity. You carry the invisible burden of chronic responsibility, feeling that if anything goes wrong, it is proof of your failure. A direct link back to the childhood belief that you were personally responsible for keeping the world safe and stable. This profound over-identification with responsibility prevents you from delegating, from accepting help, and most importantly, from simply letting things be messy or imperfect without internal panic. You are terrified of relinquishing control. This constant state of high functioning requires profound emotional suppression, maintaining that flawless exterior by sealing off any vulnerable or disruptive emotions like sadness, fear, or need, often leading to a sense of internal numbness. This means you are living a life of quiet exhaustion, running on fumes, sacrificing deep intimacy and joy for the false safety of control and performance, constantly paying the price in emotional depletion. The true cost is often paid in your body, in chronic tension, digestive issues, autoimmune flare-ups, or an inability to truly relax, because your nervous system is still stuck in the fight-or-flight mode of the small child, pouring stress hormones into a body that is desperately seeking peace. This physical manifestation is the body's way of shouting the emotional truth that your mind has spent decades suppressing. The wound is so high-functioning that when you do finally seek help, you are often dismissed or minimized because you present as so capable, perpetuating the original gaslighting wound of the childhood, the one that says your pain is invisible because you are so good at hiding it. This makes it incredibly difficult to find the compassionate witness you need, as the world sees your success, not your silent suffering. The paradox is that your high-functioning performance is a desperate plea for recognition and care, but it simultaneously pushes away the very people who might be able to provide it, as you appear too self-sufficient to need anything from anyone. You become a self-fulfilling prophecy, creating the very isolation that confirms your childhood belief that you are ultimately alone and must rely only on yourself. Healing requires not just changing what you do, but fundamentally revising your definition of safety, recognizing that your value is not in your output, but in your simple human right to exist and feel, to be imperfect, and still be worthy of love. You have to actively lower your standards of performance and tolerate the immense internal panic that comes with that perceived failure, showing your system that imperfection does not lead to abandonment. You must learn to distinguish between a healthy desire to achieve and the compulsive, desperate need to achieve to stave off a catastrophic sense of worthlessness, realizing that the latter is the voice of the wound, not the voice of your authentic ambition. This means consciously choosing rest and presence over productivity and performance, a radical act of self-care that directly confronts the inherited script of never-ending obligation. The legacy of narcissistic parenting is not just a collection of memories. It's a series of physical and emotional reactions that are still playing out in your everyday life, often without your conscious awareness, manifesting as subtle, chronic distress. It is the pattern of breath holding when you feel scrutinized or nervous, a tiny, physical way of making yourself smaller and quieter, mirroring the child who held their breath to avoid being noticed or to brace for impact. This is the body silently remembering the trauma. It is the persistent need for permission-seeking, even for the most mundane decisions or choices in your adult life, constantly deferring to others for validation because you were never taught to trust your own internal compass or authority. You seek external approval before taking action because the consequence of making a wrong choice alone felt catastrophic in your childhood home, leaving you feeling paralyzed by simple decisions like choosing a restaurant or a project. This is the moment where you recognize that the small, strange habits you carry, the constant apologies, the inability to say no, the disproportionate reaction to minor critique, are not quirks, but vital pieces of historical evidence. They are living echoes of a painful past, signals from your nervous system indicating that a childhood wound has been activated in the present moment, requiring your attention and self-compassion. The legacy also manifests as an emotional debt that you constantly feel you owe to the world. A subconscious need to overgive to others because you feel you are fundamentally undeserving of receiving care or kindness yourself. You are perpetually trying to balance an emotional ledger that you can never truly zero out, leading to cycles of resentment and burnout in your adult friendships and relationships. You begin to see the parent's voice, not as your own conscience or the voice of objective truth, but as an external artifact that needs to be respectfully but firmly evicted from your internal space, recognizing that it is not your voice. This requires actively challenging every critical thought and asking, is this my truth, or is this the echo of my parent's survival mechanism? You are separating your identity from the noise. True recognition is the moment you stop defending the legacy and start demanding a new one for yourself, one built on self-trust, self-compassion, and the radical acceptance of your own flawed humanity. You stop making excuses for the past and start taking radical responsibility for your own present and future, realizing that the survival tactics that once worked are now the greatest hindrance to your joy. This legacy recognition is the act of transforming shame into a compassionate understanding of your own history. Understanding that your current struggles are not a sign of failure, but a testament to the immense psychological pressure you endured. You turn your pain into a source of empathy for others and a profound source of respect for your own resilience, honoring the fighter you had to become to survive. You must learn to recognize the subtle, quiet feeling of emotional contraction, the tightening in your chest or stomach, that happens right before you default back into the survival patterns of people-pleasing or performance, using it as an internal signal to pause and choose differently. This recognition allows you to catch the pattern in the moment, offering yourself a moment of self-compassion instead of falling back into the old, familiar script. The path forward is the sacred, demanding journey of repenting, which is not a theoretical concept, but a daily commitment to becoming the loving, attuned parent to your inner child that you never had. This is the slow, steady process of turning a dysfunctional internal environment into one of safety, consistency, and unconditional love, a foundation that allows true healing to take root. You are building the home you always needed, within yourself. This means actively engaging in inner child healing, turning inward to ask, what did the small me need in that moment? Of fear, of shame, of loneliness, and what can I give them now, as the strong, capable adult? You offer the words, the hugs, the unwavering belief in their worthiness that was conspicuously absent from your childhood experience. You become the loving witness they always sought. Reparenting is about consciously giving what was not received: unconditional validation, emotional presence during distress, comfort when you are afraid, and the simple, unqualified affirmation that you are loved simply because you exist, without any strings attached. This is the act of filling the decades-old emotional deficit with consistent, self-generated nourishment, reducing the need to constantly seek it from external, unreliable sources. The reparenting process is about changing your internal environment from one of criticism and scarcity to one of boundless safety and abundance, offering the gentle curiosity and care that allows the inner child to finally step out of the shadows. This involves setting an internal boundary with your inner critic, actively shutting down its harsh judgments and replacing its voice with a voice of unwavering kindness and advocacy. It involves teaching yourself new, healthy coping skills for emotional regulation, learning to self-soothe with compassion, rather than defaulting to self-destructive behaviors like emotional avoidance, overworking, or suppressing your feelings. You model for your inner child how a healthy, securely attached adult manages difficult feelings, with acceptance, without panic, and without judgment. The reparenting process demands that you become profoundly self-loyal, prioritizing your well-being, your rest, and your emotional truth over the demands and expectations of others, particularly those who remind you of the old, transactional dynamic. This is the moment you consciously choose to break the contract you made with your parent and forge a new, sacred contract with yourself. The process also requires you to allow yourself to be messy, to make mistakes, and to recover from them without the accompanying internal storm of shame and condemnation, teaching your inner child that imperfection is the normal state of being human. You are essentially dismantling the core shame by proving, through consistent action, that failure is not a terminal condition, but a necessary part of growth. It is the slow, steady process of rebuilding your emotional foundation with new, stronger materials, rooted in self-knowledge and radical self-acceptance, knowing that you are the only one who can truly give yourself the security you need. You are reclaiming your sovereign right to emotional safety and self-respect, becoming the anchor and the source of all the love you need to thrive. Healing also requires the courageous, sometimes painful work of shadow work, which is the conscious act of turning toward your pain, your shame, and your grief with radical honesty, and without the urge to fix or flee. The shadow is the collection of all the parts of yourself: the angry child, the needy adolescent, the sad truth-teller, that were deemed unacceptable and banished from your conscious self by the narcissistic environment. This means actively sitting with grief. Grief for the childhood you should have had. Grief for the parts of yourself you had to abandon to survive. and grief for the decades spent living a lie of self-sufficiency and performance. This shadow work is not about dwelling in the past, but about acknowledging the reality of the loss so you can finally move through it, rather than carrying it forward as a heavy, unconscious weight. When you sit with this pain, you are not re-traumatizing yourself. You are giving the emotional reality of your past the witnessing it deserved but never received, which is the very act that breaks its power over your present. The pain begins to lose its charge when it is finally accepted, held, and named with compassion, transforming it from a terrifying monster into a quiet, integrated part of your personal history. Shadow work involves identifying and accepting your own toxic patterns, the subtle manipulations, the passive aggression, the moments of self-sabotage. Recognizing that these are not moral failings, but maladaptive tools you picked up in the survival arena. You approach these behaviors with curiosity, asking, what was this trying to protect me from, rather than with self-condemnation. Healing is often not a sudden epiphany, but the quiet, persistent practice of allowing yourself to feel the messy, uncomfortable, and true emotions that you were taught to suppress, learning that these feelings are signals, not threats. You allow yourself to be angry at the parent, to be sad about the lost time, and to be profoundly needy, giving those emotions the space they never had to move through and out of your system. This work requires a profound commitment to internal honesty, dismantling the layers of denial and justification that you built to survive, recognizing the full extent of the emotional abuse and betrayal you endured. This honesty is not about blaming the parent, but about validating the reality of your experience, freeing yourself from the need to protect the abuser's fragile narrative. In this courageous turning toward the darkness, you find the unexpected light of self-acceptance and profound, unshakable self-love, realizing that your broken, messy parts are just as worthy of compassion as your successful, high-functioning parts. The integrated self is not the perfect self. It is the self that is brave enough to hold both the light and the shadow without judgment. You use shadow work to retrieve the banished gold, the parts of your personality that were too bright, too creative, too sensitive, or too honest for the narcissistic parent to tolerate, and you consciously invite them back into your life. You give yourself permission to be exactly who you are, with all the intensity and emotional range that you were forced to suppress, reclaiming your inherent emotional freedom. In the tangible reality of your adult life, this healing manifests in relational examples that are concrete and visible, moving away from the old, painful scripts and into new, healthier dynamics with friends, partners, and colleagues. For instance, instead of immediately agreeing to a request that overwhelms you, you learn to pause and say, I need to check my schedule and get back to you. A simple, non-performative act of protecting your time and energy. Instead of dissolving into shame and collapsing into a people-pleasing apology when a partner offers constructive criticism, you learn to regulate your nervous system, allowing your adult self to respond with curiosity and self-respect. You recognize the comment as information about an external dynamic, not a final judgment on your worth, distinguishing between reality and the echo of the past. In truly healthy relationships, you stop viewing minor disagreements or moments of tension as catastrophic threats to the entire connection. You learn that your partner is not your parent, and that true love does not require a flawless, constant performance. You allow for temporary emotional distance and repair, trusting that the bond is secure enough to handle the inevitable human messiness of two separate individuals. You practice expressing your needs directly and clearly, moving beyond the childhood strategy of passive-aggressively hoping that others will intuit what you want, understanding that stating a need is not an imposition, but an act of self-respect and an invitation to genuine intimacy. This is the moment you stop waiting for the other person to read your mind and start taking ownership of your own voice. The ability to receive a compliment, a gift, a moment of care, or simply help becomes easier as you dismantle the core belief that you are only valuable when you are the one giving and you are undeserving of receiving. You learn to accept these moments with grace and gratitude, allowing yourself to be nourished by the kindness of others without immediately feeling the need to reciprocate or pay the kindness back. In a conflict, you learn to stay present and anchored in your adult self, advocating for your position without resorting to the childhood survival tactics of emotional shutdown, excessive defensiveness, or escalating the drama to match the familiar chaos. You hold your ground calmly, recognizing that your emotional safety is your own responsibility, not something you need to extract from the other person. These examples are small, daily revolutions, where you actively choose authenticity and boundary setting over the comfortable, familiar numbness of people-pleasing, gradually rewiring your relational instincts from fear-based reaction to self-respecting choice. Each successful boundary is a small, quiet victory over the emotional legacy of your childhood home, reinforcing the truth that your needs matter. Finally, you begin to choose and invest in safe people. Those who are consistent, emotionally regulated, respectful of your boundaries, and genuinely curious about your inner world, consciously breaking the pattern of attraction to the emotionally unavailable and the unreliable. This commitment to safety is a radical act of self-care and a clear message to your inner child that the days of seeking pain as a substitute for connection are over. The deepest work often involves circling back to the foundational questions that your inner child is still quietly asking, providing the answers that they were tragically denied, finally healing the source code of your emotional operating system. What did the inner child truly need? They needed safety, not performance. They needed consistency, not chaos. They needed simple, unqualified affection, not a constant stream of judgment and conditional approval. Your task now is to ask and answer these questions every day, making the effort to identify your own emotional needs, the need for rest, for connection, for creative expression, for simply doing nothing without guilt, and then commit to meeting them proactively. You are learning to read your own emotional radar with the same sensitivity you once used to read the emotional radar of your parent, directing that energy inward. This process creates an internal shift where your well-being stops being an afterthought and becomes the primary focus of your life, a profound act of self-loyalty that slowly heals the abandonment wound. You are learning to put your own oxygen mask on first, understanding that you cannot pour from an empty cup, and that your capacity to care for others is dependent on your ruthless commitment to self-care. You ask the question, if I were a child in my care, what would I provide right now? And the answer is always rooted in kindness, gentle correction, unwavering validation, and a sense of safe, unearned belonging. You then apply that loving, patient standard of care to your adult self. Recognizing that your needs are just as urgent and deserving of attention as they were decades ago. The foundational question also involves realizing that the parent's lack of love was never a reflection of your unworthiness, but a reflection of their incapacity and their own unhealed trauma. You ask, what burden have I carried that was never mine to bear? And you begin the sacred work of putting that heavy inherited burden down, separating their dysfunction from your inherent worth. You learn to define your own value outside of your utility to others, creating a solid internal metric of self-worth that is independent of external performance, approval, or achievement. Your worth becomes non-negotiable, a fundamental truth that you remind yourself of, especially in moments when the inner critic or external pressure tries to undermine you. The question of self-trust is foundational. You must ask, do I believe myself? And commit to answering with a resounding yes, honoring your own intuition, your emotional reality, and your personal boundaries, even when it is uncomfortable or provokes a difficult reaction in others. This commitment to self-trust is the ultimate antidote to gaslighting. By constantly returning to these questions, you are establishing a new internal dialogue, one based on love, respect, and emotional honesty, replacing the fear-based, critical dialogue of the past. You are becoming the safe, reliable, and consistent internal figure that your soul always longed for, healing the deepest rupture in your sense of self. The transformation that occurs as you commit to this path is not about becoming a new person, but about the slow, radiant emergence of the person you were always meant to be, the one buried under the layers of the performer identity. Safety begins to be felt not as an external condition controlled by others, but as an internal self-generated state that you carry with you, a sense of inner security that cannot be shaken by the opinions of others. You begin to define and hold boundaries not as walls to keep others out in fear, but as a framework to let safe people in and to clearly delineate your own emotional space, making space for authentic, non-exploitative connection. This ability to say no without self-betrayal is one of the most visible and profound signs that you have reclaimed your personal sovereignty from the narcissistic legacy. The most beautiful transformation is the embrace of authenticity, the glorious, terrifying moment when you realize the mask is heavy, and it is finally safe to let it drop, allowing your true self to be seen in all its flawed, messy, magnificent glory. This authenticity is not a performance. It is the quiet, settled confidence of a person who has done the work of integration and knows their flaws and loves themselves anyway. This transformation allows your actions to be driven by internal values and genuine desires, rather than by the desperate, exhausting need for external validation or the frantic avoidance of criticism and shame. Your motivations shift from fear to meaning, and the work you do becomes an extension of your true self, rather than a frantic effort to prove your worthiness to a skeptical world. You develop a profound capacity for self-compassion, recognizing that you are worthy of the same kindness, understanding, and patience you so freely extend to others, treating your mistakes as learning opportunities rather than evidence of your fundamental brokenness. This self-compassion is the lifeblood of sustainable healing, allowing you to weather the inevitable emotional setbacks with grace. The transformation is evident in your ability to be genuinely present, in conversations, in your work, and in moments of rest. Because your hypervigilance has begun to relax its grip, freeing up the energy that was once consumed by monitoring the environment for threat. You finally begin to experience life as it is, rather than as a reflection of the trauma you once knew. You step into a life where your emotional reactions are finally proportional to the present situation, rather than being triggered by the emotional intensity of the past, allowing you to navigate conflicts with clarity, rather than being overwhelmed by the inner child's fear. Your inner landscape becomes predictable, safe, and trustworthy, replacing the chaos you inherited. The ultimate transformation is the quiet, unshakable feeling of belonging. The realization that you belong here, on this earth, exactly as you are, without any need for external justification, approval, or permission. You move from a state of feeling perpetually offline and disconnected to a state of being fully and fiercely present in your own beautiful, hard-earned life. There is a profound wisdom that illuminates this path, one that reminds us that the journey is not a rush toward an imaginary finish line, but a continuous turning toward the self, a quiet moment of recognition. As the great psychoanalyst Carl Jung wisely stated, "I am not what happened to me. I am what I choose to become." This truth, simple yet earth-shattering, is the very core of your healing work. Recognizing that while your past shaped you, it does not define you, and you hold the sovereign power to choose your response to that legacy in every single moment. This external wisdom reminds you that the process is not about erasing the trauma, but about integrating the painful lessons into a larger, more resilient narrative, allowing the experience to become a source of profound, empathetic strength rather than a perpetual vulnerability. It is the recognition that the gold is often found in the darkest places, and your struggle has forged a deeper, more compassionate soul. The reference to consciousness serves as a reminder to shift your focus from the content of your pain, the details of what happened, to the context of your experience, viewing your life through the lens of your higher, conscious self, which sees the ultimate purpose in your struggle. This shift allows you to observe your patterns without judgment, moving out of the victim role and into the role of the curious observer and the conscious agent of change. This consciousness reference guides you to understand that your work is not merely psychological. It is a spiritual evolution, the ultimate journey of self-actualization, where you reclaim the divine spark within you that the criticism tried so desperately to extinguish. It is the deep knowing that your worth is inherent and transcendent, untouched by any past trauma or external judgment. The choice to become, as Jung states, is the radical reclaiming of your agency, the recognition that your present self is not simply an effect of the past, but the active author of your future, holding the pen with deliberate intention and self-loyalty. You are finally stepping out of the script written for you by the narcissistic dynamic and creating your own, authentic narrative. It is a commitment to the ongoing process of self-inquiry and deep, honest reflection, never settling for superficial answers, always diving deeper into the root cause of your pain and the truth of your experience. This continuous seeking is the ultimate act of self-love, a refusal to live a life of comfortable yet inauthentic numbness, and a commitment to radical self-knowledge. This wisdom is the permission slip to recognize the immense courage required for this work, understanding that facing the deepest pains of your past is the bravest thing you will ever do, and that you are already equipped with the resilience necessary to complete the journey. The strength required to survive is the same strength required to heal. The reference is a quiet, powerful reminder that the true work of healing is not just about feeling better, but about becoming wiser, more integrated, and more profoundly human, transforming the lead of trauma into the gold of true self-knowledge and compassion. You are turning the poison into medicine for your soul and for the world around you. We must fundamentally redefine healing, because the world often sells it as a process of becoming new, of fixing the broken parts, or of reaching a state where the past no longer exists, which is an impossible and shaming standard. But true healing is not about abandoning the self you are. It is a spiritual and psychological process of reclaiming identity, integrating the fragmented, hidden parts of yourself that were lost in the effort to survive. Healing is remembering who you were before the criticism taught you to disappear, turning toward the core self that is inherently whole, perfectly acceptable, and always worthy of love, simply because it exists, without any modification or performance. It is the slow, deliberate process of undoing the cognitive and emotional distortions that were forced upon you. This reclaiming means viewing your survival mechanisms, your perfectionism, your hypervigilance, your people-pleasing, not as flaws to be excised, but as historical wisdom that once protected you, and then gently releasing them when they are no longer necessary in your safe adult life. You thank them for their service and let them go, choosing new, healthier behaviors that align with your present reality. The goal is not to become unwounded or perfect, but to become a whole person who carries their wounds with dignity, transforming the scar tissue into a source of profound, empathetic strength and wisdom that you can use to connect deeply with others. The scar is simply a record of where the healing took place, a mark of your resilience. The truth is, there is nothing to fix in your core self. Only a magnificent, whole self waiting patiently to be revealed, waiting for you to stop criticizing it and start offering it unconditional acceptance. Healing is the journey of removing the layers of defense, shame, and performance that obscure your inherent goodness and competence. Redefining healing also involves recognizing that it is not a linear process with a clear endpoint, but a cyclical journey that involves moments of profound breakthrough, followed by necessary periods of regression and rest, which must be met with self-compassion, not panic. You learn to trust the rhythm of your own healing process, knowing that every step forward, no matter how small, is a victory. It is the realization that integration is the ultimate goal, bringing the frightened inner child and the capable adult into a cooperative, loving partnership, where the adult protects and the child informs the adult with the truth of their emotional needs. You become internally unified, ending the exhausting psychological civil war that has defined your life. This new definition of healing gives you the radical permission to be human, to be imperfect, to struggle, and to take up space without having to earn your right to exist, finally freeing you from the tyranny of the critic's perfectionism. The burden of being flawless is lifted, and the spaciousness of simply being is finally embraced. The final stage of integration is the deep, settled understanding that you are no longer defined by your relationship with your parent, but by the healthy, loving relationship you have consciously chosen to cultivate with yourself. It is a reflective, emotional closing where you feel the quiet joy of becoming whole, a profound sense of internal security and completion that you never thought possible. It is the moment of finally, fully reconnecting with the inner child and promising them with absolute certainty that you will never leave them, never criticize them, and never ask them to perform for love again, becoming their ultimate source of safety. This internal promise is the most powerful vow you will ever make, healing the deepest abandonment wound at its core. You are no longer carrying the breath-holding, permission-seeking legacy of a child. You are standing tall, breathing deeply, and trusting your own judgment, living with a quiet, fierce self-compassion that acts as an unbreakable shield against external critique. The power has shifted from the outside world back to your internal center. The trauma is now just one chapter in a much longer, much more beautiful story, and the rest of the pages are blank, waiting for you to fill them with safety, authenticity, and the unconditional love that you have finally learned to give yourself. You are the protagonist of your own life, the conscious creator of your emotional future. This integration is felt as a gentle, yet powerful settling in your nervous system. A profound feeling of being grounded and present in your body, no longer constantly bracing for impact or attempting to escape the reality of the moment. You are anchored in the self, a state of secure self-belonging. The result is the emergence of a genuine, sustainable capacity for joy and deep, restful peace. Emotions that were once fleeting or frightening, now welcomed as natural expressions of your healed and whole self. You no longer sabotage your own happiness because your internal system has finally accepted that peace is safe. You become the living embodiment of your own self-rescue, a testament to the fact that it is possible to transform the pain of the past into the quiet dignity of the present, allowing your experience to serve as a beacon of hope for others on a similar journey. Your healing is not just for you, it is a gift to the world. The final realization is that you have always been the answer, that the core strength and resilience you searched for externally was always resident within you, patiently waiting for you to recognize and embrace your own inherent power. You are enough. You were always enough. And now, finally, you know it. Unequivocally. The journey from being offline to fully present is a pilgrimage back to the self, a sacred act of defiance against a legacy of silence and judgment. The work is not easy, but every conscious choice to honor your own needs, every boundary you hold, and every moment you allow yourself to simply be is an act of empowerment. Remember that you are not broken. You are simply recovering the energy that was spent surviving and now directing it toward thriving, integrating the light and the shadow of your past to become fully, brilliantly present. Choose to witness yourself, choose self-compassion, and choose to step fully, bravely, and authentically into the glorious life that is waiting for you to claim it. The world does not need your perfect performance. It needs your whole, healed, and wonderfully imperfect self. Keep turning toward the light and keep coming home to yourself.